position was brought into the school, actually as an integration technology consultant. They brought me in to help our teacher, our faculties out and kind of figuring out, hey, how do I use technology? What are maybe some exciting different ways in which we can use these new tools? They had just gone one-to-one really in the high school, and they're kind of like, what do we do? Right? I think that's why a lot of us are here, and a lot of us are trying to figure out, it's like, how do we use the machines? How do we leverage some of the technologies to do new, exciting things with our students? And how does it actually change and revolutionize, kind of education itself? And so these are all things that I'm really interested in. Of course, my real passion is just teaching. Like teaching kids, love to teach. I was a history teacher for about 6 or 7 years. When I came here, they put me in economics, maybe they could find for me. But I love teaching that as well. It's a lot of fun. And part of the teaching the economics is actually what drove me towards using infographics. I was like, what's an exciting thing that I can do? Teaching history for so long for me was such a storytelling experience. It was like, you get to get up there, you get to tell a lot of stories, and I was like, that's what I really enjoy about teaching is kind of, working with the kids and telling these stories and getting them involved. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Some of you may or may not, I don't know how techy we are here. Some people are super techy, some people not so much. If you're into it, that's my Twitter handle. I tweet, usually when I present, and that's probably about it a lot of times. So this might be my big show. But that's it. So usually when I'm at conferences and things like that, I'm like, yeah, I'm tweeting it up a storm. And then after that, I'm like, yeah, I want to be, but I can't find the time. Maybe that's just an excuse, I don't know. So feel free if you guys want to follow me or just kind of get in on the conversation. Our goals today, like I mentioned, I'm going to provide you with the tools to build your own infographic. Or at least give you I'm going to give you way too much stuff, folks, not going to lie. We might not get through everything, but we're going to try our best. I'm going to give you lots of different things and kind of just give you some options. And so that way when you go back to your classrooms, you can do one or two things with this. You could kind of, A, you love building infographics and you want to build them yourselves, or B, you want your students to kind of show you what they can do. And that's kind of more of the track that I've taken. It's kind of I use it as an assessment tool primarily for me, and so I can see what students are being able to create, kind of what they know through different means of visual element that I'm looking at. So for the sake of time, I'm going to keep rolling. This was my problem in economics. So I was teaching, and I don't know if anyone here took economics, but we have some different curves here going on. So talking about costs, where does cost actually come out? How can we actually figure out costs? And down here, just looking at elasticity and things like that. And I was like, it's fantastic stuff. Everyone loves talking about that, right? So I was like, there's got to be a way we can make this more exciting. And these models are super important in economics. These are really important, but I just felt like they were really dry. Is there another way we could maybe see, and there's another way we can explore some of the concepts that these are actually talking about in a different means. And so I started thinking about all right, so it needs to be visual, but maybe what could that look like? And I started really getting interested in infographics, I think just because they're really popular now, right? You see them all over the place. It's kind of like you see them in different newspapers. And they've been around literally, forever, really, right? Because it's just a picture representing information, which is essentially all it is. So as long as there's been pictures representing information, there's been an infographic. Today they take on a little bit of different tack. So my problem was how to kind of figure out a different way for my students to maybe engage with this material without losing their minds, right? And kind of figuring out maybe in a different way. Can you explain this to me in a way that makes sense to you? And can you kind of show me? I want to show you just real quick, and I hate kind of doing this during presentations, but if you guys have never seen this, David Mccandless, he tells a great story about infographics itself. We're only going to watch a small portion of it, but he does a really good job about why infographics, why they're important. And since he says it better than I do, and he's got some good examples, I'm going to let him tell it a little bit. But the thing that I want you to remember, kind of what he talks about, is this kind of focus on uncluttering data. One of the things that I've also noticed about what we have in our day and age, because we have the new machines and the algorithms and things like that crunch so much data, is we have so much data. And it's like, what do you do with that data? How do you make meaning out of that data? And that was the other big thing that I was focused on as well. I was like, all right, so we have all this economic data, what can we do with it? And the other thing I really like about infographics is their ability to tell a story, and a simple story, not a story that's going to again, complicate the issue, but how can you tell me something that I derive new meaning from it? And so let's just watch him for a second.
It feels like we're suffering from information overload or data glut, and the good news is there might be an easy solution to that, and that's using our eyes more. So visualizing information so that we can see the patterns and connections that matter, and then designing that information so it makes more sense, or it tells a story, or allows us to focus only on the information that's important. Failing that, visualized information can just look really cool. So, let's see. This is the billion-dollar-gram, and this image arose out of frustration I had with the reporting of billion-dollar amounts in the press. That is, they're meaningless without context. 500 billion for this pipeline, 20 billion for this war. It doesn't make any sense. So the only way to understand it is visually and relatively. So I scraped a load of reported figures from various news outlets and then scaled the boxes according to those amounts. And the colours here represent the motivation behind the money. So purple is fighting, and red is giving money away, and green is profiteering. And what you can see straight away is you start to have a different relationship to the numbers. You can literally see them. But more importantly, you start to see patterns and connections between numbers that would otherwise be scattered across multiple news reports. Let me point out some that I really like. This is OPEC's revenue, this green box here, 780 billion a year. And this little pixel in the corner, 3 billion, that's their climate change fund. Americans, incredibly generous people, over 300 billion a year donated to charity every year, compared with the amount of foreign aid given by the top 17 industrialized nations at 120 billion. And then of course, the Iraq war predicted to cost just 60 billion back in 2003, and the mushroomed slightly. Afghanistan and Iraq mushroomed now to 3,000 billion. So, now it's great, now we have this texture and we can add numbers to it as well. So we can say, well, a new figure comes out to see African debt. How much of this diagram do you think might be taken up by the debt that Africa owes to the West? Let's take a look. So there it is, 227 billion is what Africa owes. And the recent financial crisis, how much of this diagram might that figure take up? What does that cost the world? Let's take a look at that. Douche, which I think is the appropriate sound effect from that much money. 11,900 billion. So, by visualizing this information, we've turned it into a landscape that you can explore with your eyes, a kind of map, really, a sort of information map. When you're lost in information, an information map is kind of useful. So, I want to show you another landscape now. I need to imagine what a landscape of the world's fears might look like. Take a look. This is mountains out of molehills, a timeline of global media panic. So I'll label this for you in a second. But the height here, I want to point out, is the intensity of certain fears as reported in the media. Let me point them out. So this, swine flu, pink. Bird flu. SARS, brownish here. Remember that one? The millennium bug? Terrible disaster. These little green peaks are asteroid collisions. And in summer here, killer wasps. So these are what our fears look like over time in the media. But what I love, and I'm a journalist, and what I love is finding hidden patterns. I love being a data detective, and there's a very interesting and odd pattern hidden in this data that you can only see when you visualize it. Let me highlight it for you. See this line? This is the landscape for violent video games. As you can see, there's a kind of odd, regular pattern in the data, twin peaks every year. If we look closer, we see those peaks occur at the same month every year. Why? Well, November, Christmas video games come out, and there may well be an upsurge in concern about their content. But April isn't a particularly massive month for video games. Why April? Well, in April 1999 was the Columbine shooting. And since then, that fear has been remembered by the media and echoes through the group mind. Gradually through the year, you have retrospectives, anniversaries, court cases, even copycat shootings, all pushing that fear into the agenda. And there's another pattern here as well, can you spot it? See that gap there? There's a gap, and it affects all the other stories. Why is there a gap there? You see where it starts? September 2001, when we had something very real to be scared about. So, I've been working as a data journalist for about a year, and I keep hearing a phrase all the time, which is this: data is the new oil. Data is a kind of ubiquitous resource that we can shape to provide new innovations and new insights.
I don't want to show you, it's an 18-minute video. That would be a great presentation to show you guys movies, but I would just, I put this on the site, so if you go to my site for this, for the conference, you guys can go and watch the rest of it if you want. I just thought it was a really good way in which it tells the story. One thing I would say is that as a class, like, we've watched this, and I think this is important for when you guys, if you guys are considering working with your students. When we talk about infographics, one of the things that I noticed is that this is not a skill that our students are really adept at. Like, it's something that they're not, you know, this is, and I would say most of us are probably not adept at it either. Like, we don't really have a notion of kind of putting together design, storytelling, you know, data sets, and using all that information to do it. So it's definitely a different way to teach. It's also a different way for students to kind of absorb that information. So be mindful about that. And so we spend a lot of time like deconstructing like what's going on in these infographics, and we'll take a look at some. Here's just an example of one, and it tells us like why maybe we need one. In his talk too, he talks kind of about these eyeballs, you know, like that 90%, you know, we're very visual creatures, and so the idea that you can kind of look at information and kind of absorb it. There's lots of you know, statistics about, you know, how our, you know, unfortunately, maybe how our patience and kind of our attention span is limited, so we like to get information quickly into these bites, and infographics is a pretty easy way to do that. So it's like, can I see that information more clearly? And there's definitely, I mean, you'll notice if you start digging into infographics too, this is a huge marketing tool, just in general. I use them in education, but they're primarily used for marketing purposes. It's kind of like people want to, you know, get the information out there, and that's kind of what all these websites that pop up are using them for that. The other interesting thing about how they're being used today is, you know, kind of, you know, visual resumes. Like, people are thinking about, you know, how this is, you might look in the future when people are telling their story. So they can also be useful as a storytelling technique, and also getting who you are out to different people. How I use them, though, is going back to is visualizing economics. One of the big things that when I looked at, I found this person's website, Catherine Mulbrandon. She's actually working on a PhD, and she put out a book, and this is actually the title, the beginning of the cover page of the book. But I wanted a way to express to my students also, like, well, if you were to get all the money right in the United States, like, what would it be, like, who has the most money? How much is that representative of? So one of the things that she created pretty early on was this yardstick. And so, like, how much people make, and so you can kind of see like how the average income, like right here, 75,000. And then this actually goes all the way up, you know, for that's actually a meter stick, and then you got to flip it around the other side, and then you're all the way up at the top, like, you know, 0.01% of the population. So the difference between, again, as a visual, compelling, you know, piece, like, all of a sudden, like, that puts it in perspective. Because a lot of times, just like he was mentioning in the $1 billion grant, it's kind of like, I don't have a good sense of those numbers. Like, what do they really mean? I need something to compare it to. And so one of the things that we focused on too with the class is, like, we talked a lot about how to make those comparisons and how to make them visual, and kind of how, you know, how would you construct it if you're going to do it. And so this was kind of the genesis of the project. And again, we spent a lot of time really kind of focused on how to make it happen. I know you can't read this, but this was actually the sheet that I gave them. And so the project, just so to give you guys a little bit of context, and this is probably the most important, their challenge was to design and create a visual model which helps define and clarify a complex economic concept, issue, problem, or theory for others. And so that was it. It was kind of like, I need to see those sorts of things, I need to see it in a visual way. And I didn't say you had to use an infographic. I kind of push them in that direction, but some groups actually use 3D models and things like that to actually do it, and I'll show you some pictures of that as well. We kind of came up with a list of topics, and so microloans, black markets, quantitative easing, unemployment, immigration, income inequality, inflation. Can you show me those things, like, through a visual means? And then again, because I could sit there and lecture to you, and I could, like, show you this PowerPoint of those things, and that's really fascinating and all that stuff. But what I really want is, like, do you guys get it afterwards? And can you show me that you get it? And not just like regurgitate it back to me on the quiz test or whatever that I'm going to give you. I want to see you make something new out of it. Like, I want to see that you really understand it, that you can really kind of dig a little bit deeper and show me that. And so, you know, definitely one of my goals was to kind of also simplify that information, and I think that, and this is where I think, you know, it's hard, because you can simplify something but also be reductive in it as well, right? So this idea, like, I don't want to simplify it too much, where now I'm kind of like, now it's lost all its, like, meat to it. And so that's kind of the trick for me, is to figure out how how can we reduce it to its bare components and then but not lose like the essence of what we're actually trying to do? So not to reduce it to like where it becomes meaningless. There's a great video too that I don't have, and one of the jumping off points we had was the 2008 financial crisis. There's a great like 5-minute, basically like video of all just images and infographics that kind of tells the story of it. And so I spent a lot of time trying to explain it to the students. They watched this 5-minute video and it was like, boom, I got it. Like I get how this works and I get how it functions. And I was like, that's what I was going for. I was like, how can we kind of maybe build some understanding out of this through a visual means? I'm going to show you this kind of over and over again. And this is just kind of an interesting one that I found recently about kind of what makes a good infographic. And so just the kind of the ideas of having data, design, story, and its ability to be shared with others. And if you kind of have the confluence of all those things, you have a good infographic. They kind of describe things as like there's lots of data, but you know the story is it's kind of weak, it's invisible, or if it's if it's shareable, if it's a liability in design, it's an embarrassing story, it could be damaging, those sorts of things. But I like the idea of kind of thinking of them in terms of like those 4 elements. Here's what we came up with. So here's kind of what the students produced. This is just 3 different infographics, kind of side by side to each other. This was this year looking at public versus private. And again, like this is a work in progress for our class and kind of what we've been working on. But you can kind of see here how they've kind of put it together. We talked a lot about how to limit text as opposed to, if you're just going to write a lot of text, well then your images are really cluttered. And that's not really the point of the whole thing, right? So this one, we kind of talked about this one, could be a little wordy. I like the way kind of like, you take a path and stuff like that, some examples. These are actually bigger than they look. We printed them out too, and it's like they can get super long. So they get like huge. And so you need actually a good printer to do it, to work with them. This is one of my favorites, the one in the middle was working with the black market, because I thought they did a lot of things really well, which was use good visuals. Okay, color scheme is kind of crazy, but it's they use good visuals. Like this is all about like how much guns and how much they spend on like different types of weapons and things like that. This was drugs. They used a lot of the comparative methods that we talked about as well. So how much is the black market economy? Well, if we were to put this together, they compared it to like this is how many Coca-Cola companies it would be. If you had $1 bills, it would stretch across Delaware or something. If you had to like paper the whole thing, which Delaware is a pretty small state, so maybe it's not that impressive. But twice the GDP of Georgia. So all these sorts of things that I thought were really interesting comparative examples that they kind of hit. It's not very wordy. I get the point, and it told a good story. A lot of infographics too we talked about could be like almost more like a linear model where it's you follow the path and you kind of get the idea of what's going on. And this one was actually money, money as a unit of exchange, where did it go and ending up, kind of with fiat money and things like that. So kind of taking that journey and him like describing each of the steps in which the money evolved and kind of changed. And I was like, all right, again, like a different, again, good. That one was a really good, idea of storytelling and how he got there. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. On campus, so people began to actually really embrace this, and I gave a couple different tutorials to different departments, and the department that really was interested in a lot of this was the science department. And so these aren't my students; these are other students. They put together some different, some different assessments as well. And so in this one, they did all the labs, and all these labs are actually embedded in this. And so the scientific paper that they wrote and this thing again is big, it's huge. It's actually like if I was to show you the whole thing, it'd be down there. I just couldn't fit it on there, so you could see it. But all the experimentation they went through, the data they collected, kind of all put on this one visual element. So the teacher, instead of getting that big lab report, is kind of assessing like I can look at all the information and see it here. And also one of the things that we all wanted to use it as like kind of a social marketing tool. It's like here's the research, here's what it shows, and maybe you might be impressed with it. That's kind of like the obesity one. Again, kind of going, using a method to kind of show relationships between different factors. And the last one was just Alzheimer's research and kind of different brain patterns, things like that. So again, just a different way to show the information. So. Any questions about any of that stuff so far? So maybe like why infographics? Anyone have questions about maybe how they might use it in there?
What they used to make them.
What's that?
What they used to make them.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going. We're going next. So these ones, what they use is Piktochart to make a Piktochart, which is a free program, which is one I'm going to set you guys up with today. All these links again are actually I'll even show y'all on the site. So you guys can go right there if you guys, if you remember. So this is my, I don't know, Mark Labouchere site for the sessions here at iSummit. Here's the session where these are all linked up, so you guys can go and see where they are. And there's David Mccandless, his speech, so you guys can watch that as well. It went off. Never mind. You guys can't see anything. I'm over here because my presentation is on. Here, drag it over. There you go. So this is us. There's Piktochart, Easily, Infogram, and Ben Gage. Those are the ones I'm going to show you primarily, so you guys can see that. Get back over here. Let's get back to this. I think it's frozen. Now I've frozen everything. Hold on. Yeah, Piktochart. There's a lot of good ones.
Okay.
Hold on, let me just go quick and start. All right. What I want to do next with everybody is actually just do something real quick. And again, this is I'm going to pass this out. You guys can get rid of it when you're done. This is our low tech version. Okay, and we're doing low tech on purpose.
I've seen it.
There you go. And part of this is because this is the design thinking portion of this. Have you ever done any design thinking before? Design thinking, ever heard of it before? Never heard of it?
Never.
So this is we've actually used this a couple times in school, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it because I promised you I would, for one thing, and then we're going to jump into infographics. We're not going to do this whole thing because we don't have time, but I do want to walk through some of the steps with you guys just so you can kind of see what it's about. I have to do some quick. All right. And what should I explain this? Here we go. All right, so this is where we left off. Student examples. So design thinking. So one of the things you'll notice here's an example of actually the exhibit. So all of my students actually put together in a STEAM show that we did. They're infographics. So we hung them up on the walls and so everyone could kind of see them. This is one of the 3D models. They did a project on housing, and I thought it was pretty clever. They actually went out and built like a little frame, and they put their charts in there. So it was a little bit different. In order to get to this process, one of the things that we did as well throughout actually when I was teaching this is we're actually using design thinking. And if you're not familiar with design thinking, it's basically kind of an action-oriented, student-centered, engaging approach. Well, that sounds like a lot of things, right? So what makes it different? It came from the D School at Stanford. And the D School is a famous design school that really, kind of championed this idea of, if you ever thought of how they developed the mouse, like the mouse we all used probably back in the day, that came out of a program from the D School. So they were like, well, how can we make, it's kind of like you get a bunch of marketing people together and design people together, like they figure out what do people need, how do they want it to function, and that's design thinking. So it's kind of an intentional design process. It's experimental, optimistic, human-centered. You can see all these things. Problems or opportunities in disguise. And so one of the things you do kind of originally is kind of find out people's interests. We've used this. I know I'm going fast, but if you just let me know if you have any questions. This is the big thing. You don't worry about this so much, but you can use this approach for anything. And so what we found is that it's a really good way to kind of get to the root of an issue. And so in this case, we were trying to redesign this course around kind of visualizing economics. And so what we find out is if we kind of went through this process, we really got a good sense of what the students were interested in and how they could actually accomplish this. And so that was really important. There's kind of just the steps that you need to think about them in that way. The first step in design thinking is to empathize. So figure out what the person and the people that you're working with really want. A lot of times you see marketers and people like that just assume, I know what you want, because that's my job. I'm a marketer, right? I know these things just inherently. But what they found out is that's not true at all. You need to figure out what those people want. There's this great study when they were doing this one group going through the D School. Actually, they had a problem with babies dying in Nepal. So Nepal, very cold country, things like that. In order to get when a woman in these small villages was having children, they would die en route to the hospital, and a lot of infant mortality was happening. Okay, as a result of this. So they're trying to figure out in the hospitals, all these groups were like trying to figure out ways to get better incubators, all this stuff. And I think that's how we're going to save babies' lives. And that's how they initially went into it. When they talked to these women, what they said is like, the journey is really hard and really long, and the babies were dying en route to get there. And so the solution was, after talking, kind of figuring out, was they basically made little baby sleeping bags. So like when they had them, and that saved like all the lives of these kids. Well, they wouldn't have known that if they hadn't gone to the villages to talk to the people. And that's kind of the whole point of the story, was they had to actually figure out the information from them. Once they had that, they could begin to define the problem themselves, begin to ideate, which is kind of a funny word, but just the idea that you're going to come up with ideas, right? And then you're going to prototype them, and then you're going to test them. And all this is done really kind of fast. And it's not, again, the great example that they might use is, if you were, if I was a teacher, and let's say I split you guys in half, and I was like, half of you are going to make, we're in a pottery class, you guys are going to make one piece of pottery for the entire class. Better be good, because it's high stakes, right? You got one shot. The rest of you guys are going to make as many as you can all the time, okay? And so the idea here is that you want to test, you don't want to spend a lot of time making the perfect thing. You want to get a lot of things out there and learn from your mistakes, and kind of to develop a bigger one. And again, we'll get back to infographics here in just a second. It's all going to come back, I promise. So in this kind of strategy too, one of the things that we talk about too is like it's kind of flaring and kind of expanding. So during the empathy phase, you want to kind of really define, kind of like stretch out and kind of figure out as much information as you can. And then during the define phase, the ideate phase, you want to bring it back and kind of come up with a solid thing that you could do. And then it kind of flares out again when you prototype and test. And there's other examples of this as well. This is usually used, again, to be a very creative process. It's also a very messy process, and this is what it looked like in our classroom a lot of days. It's kind of like, it's pretty messy. Now you don't see a lot of technology in here as well, but I will say it's great for getting ideas out. It's fantastic. And so, again, lots of different kind of creative ways in which students have been thinking about different problems using kind of different methods. This is actually the economics class right here as we began to work on stuff. I'm in the classroom, so they're all kind of looking, trying to figure out what's going on. There's these guys building their resources, and then ultimately, coming up with a good product that we were pretty happy with. So, one of the things, what I think I'll do is we can kind of, and let's just look through this real quick. And what I might have you guys do is we'll hold off until the very end, and you guys can maybe work on this. But I feel like if we don't get to the actual infographic piece, we might not get to it, and that's an important piece. But this is for you guys to also take home as just maybe a template. And how we would use this is to kind of build empathy, is ask questions, so figuring out what do I want it to see. Just thinking about what you guys might create today was the idea. So I ask a bunch of questions. What do I like most about my content? Whatever it is, economics. What do I hate about it? What do I want to know about it? And then you interview people about those things and figure out what do they like about it. And so you would take that information. The next phase would be to actually help you define what this is. And so that would be like, so and these phrases here are actually particular to the D school. So it's interesting, surprising, or telling that whatever you learn from that interview. It's interesting that, hey, you know what, everyone hates supply and demand. Okay, like, what is that? That information might help me as I kind of move on. One thing that seems important is that students, really like they really like to work in groups and collaborative groups. Okay, maybe I'll incorporate some of that stuff in there. I wonder what this means, and then kind of going through, you begin to kind of narrow down your focus, and then you might want to reframe the topic at the end. A really important one, sorry, was it would be game-changing if we could. And so for me, it was like, it would be game-changing if we could create infographics to help students better understand, an economic concept. And so that was where, we kind of landed on that. So at the next phase, you would just come up with a bunch of different ideas. This, again, is where you're flaring out. You're like, let me come up with a ton of different ideas about that topic. I want to do pictures. It could be a flow chart. It could be, concentric circles, whatever it is that you have. Then come up with some questions about them. And then the second to last thing that you would do is just actually draw a sample of it. And so actually come up with a sample and kind of see what it looks like and just kind of put it to the test and then show somebody and get some feedback. And we actually did some of these exercises in class, and that's actually was really helpful, again, working through the design, but also working through getting to a portion where they actually felt comfortable with the design process and what it meant. So I mentioned this only just as a tip too, to kind of help work the students through this. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to show you guys some of the different examples of infographics that you can have. And again, if you're going to take notes, this might be the good one. So remember, we're looking for data, design, story, and shareability. And I would say this last one is kind of really it's the one that you probably don't need as much if you're only going to keep it in your classroom. You do need good design, because without that, it's going to look like a train wreck. And you saw some of the ones that I showed you. Some of those designs weren't that great. Well, you need the information, or else the whole thing kind of falls apart. And really, I think one of the hardest part is kind of incorporating that story. How do you tell a really compelling story with the information and data, design, and everything else? And that's to me is the hardest thing. If they nail that, it's kind of like, that's like you wrote your thesis statement, right? Like if you're an English teacher, like that's it. Like you nailed it. You have a strong thesis statement. You got it. I get it when I look at it. What's going on? Here we're actually going to look at more than these, but these are a couple of big companies that actually produce free infographics that we all can use. Venngage is one, Infogram, Piktochart. I'm going to show you guys Easily here in just a second as well. These are all great. You'll see these again and again, and I'll point them out to you. So the first one is Easily. The pros, built-in templates. You can download JPEGs. This is important too, because if you actually want a copy of this stuff, some of the programs that you use, like you can't access them. You can only access them online. Like you can embed them on your site, very cool, and that data might be living, but you can't actually do anything with it. And so dynamic data means if you kind of keep changing the data around, it'll automatically reset online, which is pretty cool. Some of the cons for this stuff is you got to pay for a lot of the templates. Like again, this is a company, like they're trying to make money on this, and so you might need some licenses and things like that. We did it. If you just sign up for once, like all your students could use them, and that's what we did. And I'll show you all these in just a second too. Venngage is super flexible. Okay, much more used for marketing though. Is kind of I would consider this one to be kind of more of a marketing one. It is a blank slate though. Like if you love design and you love doing something like that, that's great. But you better be prepared and put a lot of class time, or at least give your students a lot of time to actually figure out how to use the information, because it's a ton of stuff to figure out. Infogram is probably one of the simplest ones to use. And it's mainly used for like mobile, so like mobile devices and things like that. It has like a very limited number of charts that you can put in there, but putting the data in is super easy for a lot of these things. So you can grab the data, dump it in, and it'll spit out like a really nice chart. And it's also kind of that living data. Piktochart is the one that we used mainly. And it's really similar to Easily. It's just a really easy to use. It's got lots of nice templates. And I recommend using templates again for the first time through. Because unless you're really good at design, you have to build everything from the ground up. It's like, this is just like, you'll see when we do it here together. But the circles are already made. You just need to change like the numbers. Like change the numbers, change whatever it is. Maybe you can add some arrows or add some stuff. But you're essentially just kind of creating something that's been built and you're just modifying it. So to show that kind of in real time, a little bit, let me find...
You're off again.
Yep, I'm off again. That's right, thanks. I always use the mirroring function, and I never... let's go back to that. Let's go back to Old Faithful here. There we go. All right. Let's see. So the first one I showed you guys was Easily. And so again, this is just it right here, just to kind of show you, give you guys a sense of what it would be. And then we'll choose one in just a second. I'm going to put you guys can choose whichever one you want. I just want to show you guys what your options are as well. You can literally just, if I click on the template, right, it's going to load it up. And all of them have a little bit different ways in which you can kind of, build stuff. And so in this case, they have themes, so visual themes that you can use. And if I click on any of this stuff, right, I can change, you can kind of change where it's at, or I can, move it around, put it wherever, change the data. But I can't necessarily change the overall feel of it. Like it's still going to be a lot of the same things. I mean, I could change, the opacity of certain things, and you can see all the, make it disappear. And you just have to figure out what you want. You can change some of the. Let's see if I can change the background. You drag it in, yeah. So you have to kind of move it around. You can change text. Charts are all very similar for a lot of these as well. So if you put this in and you double click it, you'll see here kind of like where I put the data in essentially. You can kind of manipulate that. But it just kind of depends on how you want it to look. I'm going to switch to Venngage. So this is that other one, Venngage, that I mentioned. And if I was to create an infographic in this one, they have some ones that are template driven. A lot of them though, when you do it, you have to buy a lot of those. And so what I mean is when you start, like this is your starting sport, like this is it. Like you start here and you're like, build an infographic, you're like, oh my gosh, like how do I do this? And so it's actually, again, they have all these icons that you have over here. They give you a lot of different kind of, there's literally, all this stuff is drag and drop. So you're literally just kind of going in, dragging what it is that you need. But you can imagine, like if you were to build one like this, it would take a while to kind of get a polished version of it. You just have to spend the time. And again, it's not that I'm, one thing or the other, but you have to figure out for your class what's going to work best. They have some, pictogram. Again, you can kind of do all this stuff. Like you can kind of add a ton of stuff. You got different flow charts, all that. Let me go to this one. All right. This is, I've actually used this one a bunch. This is actually data from our school itself, and so this is actually kind of interesting. So we had to build one that was, and this is living. What's kind of neat about this is when you share it out, you can share out, anyone can kind of see the data, and it changes over time. But this would be, so this is how many percentage of this faculty use Schoology at our school. This was like 2 years ago, and so you can just kind of put that data in. And that's as easy, again, as kind of adding these charts. You can kind of drag them in. Go down here, actually, click. And for this one, it's just you get all these different charts that you could possibly make. Right. So if I was to kind of insert this bubble chart, it's going to insert it below, and then it says double click to edit. And then a lot of times what I would do is I would find the data sets first. And so you're going to see these kind of spreadsheets, like every time all the ones that I'm showing you are this way. You kind of drag it in, find whatever stats that you want, and then just dump it in. On the site that I put for you guys too, I also included, or I think I need to include, I have the link for you, places to get great data. Okay, so you're looking at stuff like this, a lot of times it's hard to go to, but a lot of them are just sites. So some of it was like, the Bureau of Labor Statistics got stuff on everything that we do in this country, essentially. So it's a good place to get data. So if you're wondering, hey, where can I get it? Well, you could develop that in your class, which would be ideal if you're a science teacher or something, and you're like, this is our actual data from the experiment that we ran. We could put that in there. Okay, so. I think that would be fantastic. You can change all the colors in the charts, just by going to settings. How big do you want it to be? Every one of these is a little bit different as far as their functionality. Okay. And I'm going to show you guys. The last one I'm going to show you guys is Piktochart in just a minute, and we'll work that one a bit together. I put this on the site as well. If you're looking at, again, like great infographics and how they tell stories. Here's 10 signs you're reading a Gothic novel. Just again, this might give you some inspiration as to kind of what your infographic could look like. So you have lots of different, kind of thing, what's going on here. These things are all, someone had to create all this stuff though. So again, it goes back to your design prowess. Like, how do you make this stuff? That would be, again, you have to decide for your students. That's why we used a lot of the ones that were, templates. Which one did I like? So this is, I thought this was kind of neat, all these different kind of cards, things like that. So which Gothic novels are best? You can kind of see, it's kind of, again, the bloodiness, it's kind of got that theme going to it. Let's see, there's this one that was, this was kind of interesting. So this is one about just, deep water. So this is like where the, and this one, again, is pretty interesting because it goes on and on and on and on. So 22 feet, the draft of an Australian offshore vessel ocean. Here's the Washington Monument underground. There's the inverted Empire State Building. And this thing just kind of goes on and on and on. And you're like, okay, what's going on? Nothing for a while. And you get to this, the maximum depth for this mammal And I keep going. There's finally get to the Titanic here at the bottom of the ocean. It's just like, so it gives you again, like, and one of the things I mean about that again is it's easy to say that the Titanic, right, is I don't know, 12,500 feet below the ocean. Cool. Sounds really deep. I'm not really sure how deep that is. I'm sure that's a couple miles. But then when you kind of have to work through this infographic to get there, you're like, yeah, like I have a better sense of kind of what that means. And so for me, the infographics has always been about a way to kind of get to that information. Like, how do I really interpret it in a way that's meaningful? And so again, easy to say, a lot harder to do, which is something I definitely learned. And so being, pretty, working with my students, what it is. So I thought that we could do, if you guys are willing, is just to kind of work through one of these Piktocharts together, okay? And so what you could do, if you have a device that can get to Piktochart that can manipulate it, I'm not sure if you could do it on the iPad. I don't know, it's web-based, so I don't know, but you tried it?
Is it Flash or Java?
I think it might be. That's a good question. I don't know.
It's Flash, yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna be in trouble. I have to check. So if not, maybe you could try Infogram. Might be one that you want to try because that should work on there as well. But really, what I was thinking is that we could kind of experiment around with this. And so where I would start with this in Piktochart, one of the things you'd have to do is actually make an account. And again, nothing cuts free. Okay, you only have to pay if you want to. If you're going to do like some of the the really fancy ones. And again, this is primarily used for a lot of marketing stuff, but you can kind of see some of the ones. Like this was a really popular one, this financial one in the middle there that a lot of students of mine actually used. So it just kind of depends. I'm going to start. Let's see. I'm going to start from scratch here just to kind of show you guys what it might look like. So the way these work, starting in Piktochart. And maybe you guys can kind of sign up as we do this. This is the blank canvas one. You'll see that they function like blocks. And so what you're doing is you're building each one of these things by block by block by block. You can, let's see. And again, when I get into it, I can edit any of this stuff, right? So I can add a block. Once you double click it, you're kind of in this little notion where you can add a block, move it up, move it down if I want that to switch. Moving it up or down. If I want to clone the block, I want to use the same one, or you've got lots of different settings. This is important too because the longer, again, the bigger you create your infographic, and let's say you want to print this thing off. On a regular printer, the more blocks you have, okay, think about this thing as like kind of starting out at this width. Well, the more you add blocks and it tries to fit it on that piece of paper because it's constrained by the widths of the paper, it's going to you're going to get this little thing. So if you ask your students, you're like, I got 15 of these blocks, and you're like, well, we're going to print it on printer paper, or if we're going to print it on this, okay, this would be about 2 to 3 blocks worth of that, okay, on here. Think about it like that. The more blocks you make, it's just going to shrink it because it's constrained again by the paper. So one of the ways, and again, this is just, we're lucky enough to have a ruler printer here, but we've printed off pretty big ones because they can actually just kind of roll it out. Like there's no end to that paper, so it'll just kind of keep going and keep going. And we printed off some pretty big ones before, so pretty interesting. Up at the top, so besides that, up at the top, what you kind of see up here is just, what do I want, what do I want any of this stuff to look like? And so if I, click on the background over here, I can choose a background, whatever it is that I want. I'm literally just dragging and dropping this stuff again. Boom. That might be a little busy for us.
You ever use a Survey Monkey option to bring it in? It says right up there,
We haven't on our thing, but you totally could. Yeah, that's just something that something that we actually talked about as a class for next year, like creating surveys and actually kind of using those things. That would be a fantastic idea. And again, because you're getting that data real time from whatever it is that you've done. So we've primarily used it just kind of full. Once we have all the data, we're making it kind of afterwards. But absolutely, it would be a great idea. All the stuff is still the same thing as well. You got your graphics. You can put in any shapes and lines, icons. One of the things I did too, and I'll kind of click back over here. These icons, I give you some. If you're looking for more icons, you can get some online for essentially what's free. But a lot of the times it's hard to find these things. And so here are a ton of them, and you can get, you can spend money and get more. They offer a ton of these things for free, but a lot of times, when you're trying to build these things, you want a particular picture. And so again, these are just free icons that you can get, and I linked that up over here. So icons to use in infographics would be something worthwhile for your students. The other thing would be nice is they also have free backgrounds, which you can also kind of just pull in and do that. So again, you just you can build this thing out to be whatever you want it to be. Again, if I'm just clicking on stuff, I can delete it, move it around. Let me find one other thing. So the thing that, what I would say is important is kind of these charts, maps, and videos. So when you grab a chart, this will go through. Again, it's going to give me the data sets that I want. So you just have to decide again what the color, what kind of chart fits best. And I think this is actually one of the things that makes it pretty powerful. So depending on the data set that you're going to get, again, it's like what do you want it to look like? And it's really, really simple. I like these charts a lot, so I can do that. And then once I have it, I can just move it around in that block. And you can have the data, you can make it bigger, whatever you want it to be. So a lot of it, again, is just playing around. I'm going to add a block here. Add a block. The maps feature is also one that a lot of the students have liked to use in the past. You can change the color of them. How do I use that again? Settings. So yeah, so you can change the color by if you want to, point out that Idaho is for some reason different. You can kind of fix it, move it around. It is different, right? We all know that. You can insert that map. So again, it's a really flexible tool, and I'd be surprised. And this is I don't know. But what I notice with my students, and same thing with you guys as well, is what I usually do is introduce this to my students. So like, here's a tool that you can use. I don't spend a lot of time actually like going through every step of it, because what I find is that they don't care. And they don't listen to me either. They basically just see it and they're like, yeah, I think I can figure that out. And then they do figure it out. The thing that I help them with is like, okay, like, yeah, your chart is great, all this stuff is good. Does it flow together? Again, kind of going back to those storytelling techniques, like, are you effectively actually, saying what you wanted to get across? I mean, to me, those are the big things. Is it, and I make them write like kind of a statement of purpose, like what are you trying to show? And the first year we did it, we actually had a little showcase, and so to take you all the way back to to go all the way back to some of the pictures that I showed you guys. So right here, we actually before they turned them in, I was like, we showed them to everybody. And I was like, so these guys came up and they were like, here's our infographic, and I gave them like a Google form to fill out, and I was basically like, I had a bunch of questions like, what do you think it's about? Was it clear? All the criteria on the rubric, and those guys got that feedback because they're like, what, I think this is fantastic, and it totally gets my point across. Until they got the data back, and they're like, no one knows what we're going for here. Like, no one's really is clear on it. And so, hey, you guys really need to focus on storytelling. Go back to the drawing board, focus on this, and that repetition also. Really helped them understand kind of what we were going for, just in general. So, I just got dropped. And I thought that was, again, a pretty interesting example of how students can really, benefit, again, from kind of sharing their work with others. What questions do you guys have? What would be the best use of your time now? Do you guys do you want to play with it? Do you want to build something? Because we have time built in there. But this would kind of be your guys working and kind of figuring it out, and then asking me questions about kind of what it is you're working on.
We have a question. We're embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed.
Can you give me examples how I could relate this in a first grade classroom? I have a couple of ideas, but not so much the digital way, but more on the paper side of them creating something on a poster.
You want them to kind of.
But like, are there?
Here's a couple ways here's what I would think if I was actually in elementary. Here's what I would use them for to begin with. One way in which I could see them being used. First, I would say just by the teacher themselves.
Right.
I've been in first grade classrooms before, and like there's lots of there's lots of flow charts and things
Right,
like
that's
that
what we
that
were
students
thinking.
could
Right.
use and kind of like, don't touch this thing, and yeah, and whatever it is. I could definitely see actually creating some of those for use in my classroom as like just a professional having stuff.
Right.
How to use them as far as like part of your teaching. I think having those conversations with the students about, I would keep it simple. Yeah, I mean the digital stuff, probably not a good way to go, unless you have maybe some iPads that they could still draw and kind of keep things simple. I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I think the 5-year-old can probably manipulate some stuff, but still it's pretty tough. And so, like I said, infographics don't have to be as complicated as what I've pointed out. You can there's so many different gradations in there as far as this is a senior in high school, right? I mean, this is like somebody who's like, not only does he get the concept, but these high concept of design and storytelling, I mean, those are big time. For you, it might just be like, I don't know, I mean, depending on what you want to do, right? Is it more about just kind of pictures like relating to actual real things? Is that kind of the concept you want to get across, or is it?
I mean, I can see, I don't know if you would call it an infographic. I guess it would be like a little poster board and then create a picture of themselves or draw a picture of themselves and insert cutouts that tells about themselves, like I like these things, or write a couple of words that describe the
I think it could be. I mean, again, it totally could be. Again, that's using icons and pictures to tell a story, or at least to tell to have
it's
information.
Just not digital like this.
And I mean, I guess what I would say too is, we did one with the students, and again, the first graders did one with like the letters, right? Like a letter, and then like here, what associations can you make with that letter? And they actually did use iPads, and that was a second graders and stuff. And they did they had the E, then they would like find a picture online of like something that, what else has the letter E or something like that. So again, you can kind of keep it simple. Yeah. Other questions that you guys have? Ways in which you might use it in the classroom? From an assessment point of view too, what I would say is I was pretty fair, I think, with my rubrics. And again, just probably not for the first graders. You don't have to worry so much about that. But part of this was with the technology. I'm a big believer of if I'm just gonna like throw something in their face and kind of not be this is totally new to them. It's pretty new to me. My expectations as far as like their technical ability, like I really didn't assess them on that as much. It was again more back to like, are you telling a compelling story? Did you actually meet the challenge? Do I understand that economic concept more easily?
Did you do peer review on this?
We did the peer review. Yeah, and it was just like, what I mean? So and that was huge. That made a big difference. And so it wasn't, again, I'm not going to, in other words, you're not going to fail the content because like you don't know how to work the program. Like that's not, that's not fair. It's like, but they've had a lot of different ways in which to share that information with me, so I know they have the content as well. Yeah. So that was another big thing that we talked about a lot. Yeah. The one thing I would say for you guys is just come up with an idea. For next year. And you guys can think about this on your own. Take the paper with you, but think about how you might use this for next year. This is to me, this one is way complicated, but it's telling a story. And just think about ways in which you might want to use it. Again, there's no real kind of right or wrong to it. And sir, you mentioned there was that video that you showed me. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, it's based on the book, An Infographic History of the World.
So these things are, infographics, like I said, have been around for a long time. It's a great way to share information with your students. So it's a good way to kind of show things a little bit differently to them. And I think that today a lot of students are actually used to kind of consuming information like that.
Absolutely.
So
I taught math and geography this last year.
Yeah,
even though I'm a language arts teacher.
Right.
And for the final project, I wish I'd been tuned into this in advance. I had them. I did a combined final exam for the two subjects to make my job easier, of course.
Right,
and it was they each chose a country and became an expert on that country, and then had to present. The math component of it was presenting statistical analysis of information about that country. And very few of them actually made their own graphs or graphics, but they had to actually research and find data and present it.
Sure.
But so much application, especially for interdisciplinary type projects.
Right. And that, you know, and again, coming from a history background, that definitely was throwing some of that in for the economics. It's like, yes, we're learning about some of those deep things, but this is also about kind of being able to tell that or explain that information to somebody else, which was a little bit different. So I think that's, you know, a great example. And it depends on what skills if you want the kids to literally like physically graph it, probably not for you, right? I mean, it's just, you know, it's like the machine's going to do that for you. What I would argue, though, is again, given the fact that there's so many new tools, digital tools out there that enable you to do that stuff, what we're asking our students, I was also looking selfishly, what are some other ways students can present information to me? Because I've read tons of essays. A lot of our students are really good at writing essays. It's like, but like, do you really understand? Again, it goes back to, do you really understand the information? And do you understand it well enough to kind of show it in a different way? And if you do, well, that's kind of compelling. You really kind of now have ingrained that knowledge, and you fully have incorporated into kind of like, you know, your intelligence. So that was just another factor kind of going into it. And the students, you know, I'll be honest with you, have enjoyed it a lot. Like they're pretty engaged in the process. Because I think it's a challenge for them. They're like, it's pretty, you know, again, if I find the information, I can write the paper, and I get that. It's like when I have to now design something, like it's a different skill. And I think, you know, again, I think this is pretty applicable out in some of the, you know, some jobs they might have in the future as well. It's kind of like, hey, you know, you might, if you're into marketing, if you're into that kind of stuff, if you're into design, like this is going to be something that you're going to be facing in the future. How do you do that work? That's all I have for you folks. I'm more than happy to stick around. Does anyone have any questions about anything else? Any questions? Concerns? What I would again just point you back to as a final closing note is if you missed something today, here's everything that we did. Okay, so the icons, the best infographics, so you guys can get inspired. These are the 4 kind of ones that I've used in the past. And there's tons out there. There's like visually, there's like lots of these different things. Many of them, again, are like marketing tools. It's kind of like that's what they're using it for. So it's totally up to you to figure out which one. The ones I pointed you though to, these 3 in particular, are the easiest to use. And so when you're thinking about students and how you might want to use them, these are going to be the easiest ones to use. The Venn-Gage, and I'm almost kind of chopped it off the presentation. But it's still a good one to use because I used it in the past, but it's way more complicated depending on what you want to accomplish.
Useful websites up there as well.
I'm going to put that on there, and I have it on, let me just see if I can find it on my, where did I have it? Let's see, let me see, this is what's this going? Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what, I'm going to find where I put the link. How to find data sets. Yeah. So I'll post this link here in just a second. This actually comes from Piktochart, but reputable, validated data sets. So again, just kind of where you might find stuff. The World Health Organization, Guardian Data Blog. You know, I mean, these are all these are government agencies that collect a lot of good information. So again, when students are looking up stuff, you don't have to just, you know, but that could be part of your project. Part of it could be like, find the data. Like, that's your job. Like, you go do that. If that's not what you're looking for, then like, here's some good examples of where to find that stuff.
It's great to have them do their own surveys as well.
That's what, and I think that's to the monkey, the survey monkey stuff is awesome. Is to find out, and especially when you can kind of get that authentic nature to it, like they really buy into it, because then it's like, I own that thing. I built it from scratch. I get it. Like, it's my data. All that stuff is in there. Yeah, that's the best.
Do they print out pretty easily from the websites?
They do, as long as they're.
It's A4 mostly though.
Yeah, it's A4. You can actually, you can actually again. So this is how it's a business.
Of course.
If you want a different format, you probably have to pay for it. But that's also why I use Piktochart, because it was really easy to kind of just print it off and get. So I didn't really have to mess. I didn't buy anything extra to do it. The students didn't have to buy anything extra. I wanted to make sure that they, no extra fees or anything like that go into it. But yeah, it was easy to do that. I didn't have any problems.
Are there apps for any of these?
There are, like I did look, I'm trying to remember, I didn't, I'd have to look again, I tried to, there's not a lot of great stuff on the iPad for it. There are some, but they're really kind of new, and then like they're not, and I've built my own infographics. You could use like Keynote and stuff like that to build shapes and to make a move, you know what I mean, do things.
Right.
The one that I didn't show you, which is pretty neat, was somebody, I mean, Google page, what is it, just Pages, or no, Google Docs, sorry. This movie that these people made, this infographic of basically like just using that as a platform to kind of create a whole visual element and basically like a story.
Because there's a lot more like animated.
That was animated, yeah, and I was like, that was intense. Like I was like, they built, I can't remember what it's called, I had it bookmarked for a long time.
Piktochart works on fine.
Those
It
are
does,
working
yeah.
on
Just
that?
through Chrome or Safari.
It's the browser, yeah.
It's the browser, okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions, again, my information is on that site. You can email me. Feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to help you kind of walk through anything if you're not clear about it. But that's it. You guys are free. How was your day? Everyone's day good?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Good. You guys learned a bunch.
Yeah, I've been to a lot of conference, well, not really conference